say in management that people do not leave companies, people leave bosses. And that sets the background for my relationship with the speaker, Dr. Ajay Shukla. He is probably the best boss I ever had in my educational career. When he was the president of International Horizons College, and he took the risk and the bet on me when he, introduced me to that particular college because I was perhaps the only non-Westerner in that particular management thing, and I would never, forget the work that he did and fantastic work that he did. Many times I believe, and he proved it, that educational sector could gain a lot when people from industry join them, when people from corporate world join them and provide them the discipline, the thinking, the thought process of the people who have been at the helm of the corporate affairs. Dr. Shukla is a living example of that. He has been managing director of Reader's Digest, which is obviously the household name we all had heard before this internet. That was probably the source of education for us. Our parents used to talk about that. So that was one. Then he was also the managing director of McGraw-Hill, which is a company which provides one of the best educational material to anywhere in the world. And he made many, many, corporate acquisitions as well as divestment as a role of that. So I would never forget, that McGraw-Hill, which later, had for some time Tata McGraw-Hill also in India, which is again a way of providing the best educational material at Indian prices. From that point of view, if I have to say that, he made those changes. And then he is also the founder vice president of Avian Amro's credit cards. Now, in all these things, let us not forget his educational links also. He was CEO of this ISC, which was one of the ventures of GEMS education to go into higher education. Unfortunately, those dreams, those visions were perhaps, subservient to the changes that were taking place in this country, both macro level as well as company level. So therefore, a beautiful dream had to be diverted into something else. But today, he is the managing director of an educational consulting firm, the top educational firm in this world, in this part of the world, where he's providing companies, universities, roadmaps, how to set up the best campuses, the best universities in this, and study abroad. So I could go on and on since I, love him from that point of view a lot. But I would stop here and will invite him to share his experiences, insights, and perhaps a plan of action on corporate governance in terms of both corporate bodies as well as education. Maybe you can bring in your corporate experience also from that point of view, and that will be very, very wonderful for our viewers. So, Dr. Shukla.
Thank you, Professor Mohan, for a very flattering introduction. I don't deserve much of it. You're doing stellar service by gathering such an eclectic group of people who can contribute towards the knowledge base that is so urgent and imminent and important at this point in time. There would be some people who are stepping into leaderships, some people who are aspiring to become independent directors or are moving into a board position. So it's important to set the context on what is governance and what is management, what is good corporate governance, and what are the benefits of good governance, how to achieve it. And there are some new challenges because the market landscape is changing. There are startups, there are unicorns, there is social media, there is viral impact on reputation because of that. There are some global perspectives as well. There is the new element of ESG, which is environment, social, and governance, which is becoming very important. And of course, there are some regional stories and global stories which make this topic very important for everyone to recognize and act. So starting with what is governance versus management. And if I was to simply describe, what is governance, it's about protection of the business. Management is about growing the business. So the responsibility of governance is what in our culture we call the Lakshman Rekha, which is that your actions as a director on the board or the chair are to protect the business. It's not to direct how the management runs the day-to-day operations. So that's a very important aspect that we must recognize. When we say protect, they have to be very well thought through, laid out, updated, and concurrent policies and procedures for a lawful and ethical operation. I think that's one of the most important things that governors can do. It has to optimize the benefits for all its stakeholders. Now, I was very careful in choosing my words. When I say stakeholders, I mean everyone who's involved with the company or the organization. It's not just the shareholders, it's employees, it's vendors, it's customers, the regulatory bodies that govern that particular sector. So you have to ensure that there is optimal benefit for all stakeholders. We spoke about bylaws, policies, and procedures to direct, people, how they should act. And one of the important things is related party transactions, conflicts of interest. So those are things that should be stated upfront as we implement governance, that there has to be a line of division between ownership and management. And any conflict of interest by way of related party transactions, as we recently saw in the case of a very large unicorn in India in fintech, in Bharat Pay, where husband and wife were in management positions, and HR firms who were supplying talent to the fintech were family owned, over invoicing on some of the commissions due to these vendors was rampant. So there are things that the governors have to do to make sure that they protect the business. And of course, there is the issue of reputation, which is so valuable in today's times. I won't touch much on the management side, but these are mostly the actions taken by the CEO and the leadership team to take the company in a positive direction. The typical keywords are CEO, CFO, Chief Operating Officer. They are the people who are responsible for the management. And other keywords could be, planning, developing, managing customers, managing employees. So those are things that governors will not do, or directors on the board will not do. These are delegated by the board to the CEO, CFO, and COO. So that's really the key difference between governance and management. Good corporate governance is having an effective board of directors and chair. And as Dr. Stevens said earlier, I think having the right kind of experiences, skill sets, which are relevant to the industry, but at the same time diverse. It shouldn't always be industry people. And they are, complementing each other rather than, being a mirror image of each of the directors. So, we have to seek diversity on the boards. They have to focus on long-term metrics and long-term success, and not necessarily get into day-to-day operations. And there has to be a mindset of continuous operations, that we discussed this in the last board meeting. These are the minutes, these are the actions taken, what happened. And, while we are seeking long-term metrics and success, we should also make sure that there are improvements happening in policies, procedures, and the overall theme of protecting the interest of the company or the organization. As I said, it has to balance competencies, experiences, company knowledge, industry knowledge, but underpinning all this is independence. That they should not be seen, cozying up to either the CEO or the shareholders or the majority owners. They are giving their independence, advice, competence, skills, and experiences. There is another aspect of director training. The company's universe is expanding so much that often we find that there is inadequate training of directors in terms of what the company's aims, goals are, what the fiduciary and non-fiduciary responsibilities of a director are, and there has to be a continuous evaluation, self-evaluation, and a dispassionate self-evaluation of the board. As we did, if you remember, Professor Mohan at International Horizons College. We were evaluating the board of directors themselves, and the chair would present the results of that and gaps and a plan on how they can close the governance gaps. So those are the good aspects of corporate governance. And of course, the keywords are transparency, ethics, balancing profitability with investor and shareholder interest. Now, benefits of corporate governance are obviously, you operate within the law, so there is compliance, there is efficiency, there is risk evaluation in a forward-looking mode as opposed to passive mode, that we are able to anticipate what's happening in the market environment. For example, today, we know that runaway inflation is a big issue across the world, across countries, across regions. So what is the board doing to make sure that the impact of inflation on the company's performance is being looked at by the management? Of course, there is an element of strong strategic planning. So the board should have a serious oversight on the strategic plans that the CEO and the leadership team are developing, and brand image as well. Well, how do you achieve excellence in corporate governance? Obviously, diversity is important, and Dr. Stevens touched on it, that we need a diverse set of experiences. But I also feel very strongly that if you look at the Western world and most companies, there is what I call the Wasp Syndrome. Wasp is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and it's basically male driven. So there is not only racial diversity issue, there is gender diversity issue, there is background diversity issue, which leads to gaps in differences and diversity of viewpoints and inputs from a diverse set of people. So those are things that the board should also consider, that it's not just diversity of experience, but other forms of diversity. And these are also part of the ESG changes that corporate governance is going to see in the coming years. There has to be an issue of auditor independence. And we have seen bad fallouts of this even regionally, as we saw the meltdown of NMC Healthcare. We have to wonder, what were the auditors smoking when they don't even confirm the bank balances and just take the founder's self-declaration as a proof of cash balances. I mean, these are the basics of audit. So auditor independence is important. Transparency we spoke about. And of course, making sure that there is long-term value creation, and the management and the strategic plan is being interrogated on it. Sustainability is important, and I think we should devote some time later, my suggestion, Professor Mohan, on ESG. And documentation and compliance with policies and procedures. Again, Dr. Riesling touched on it, that we should have version control. We should respond to any incidents, critical incidents should be surfaced at board meetings. And if they mean any changes in policies and procedures, or if there are environment changes, regulatory changes, they must immediately reflect in the policies and procedures and the compliance thereof. The new challenges really, and these are my concluding remarks, are that today's corporate world is not only listed companies. 20 years ago, it was like that. There are so many unicorns. Only a week ago, India declared that it has 100 unicorns. These are billion-dollar valued startups. And these are run by young, impatient founders who are chasing growth at all costs. And that is where the role of the board of directors and governance comes into play, that while we are chasing growth, while we are chasing valuation, what is important is that we protect the interest of all stakeholders. We don't chase growth for the sake of it. We know that in a tech environment, companies can grow very fast and fall very fast as well. So making sure that the management doesn't become like cowboys in Western movies is an important role of governance. And we have seen such examples. I spoke about Bharat Pay earlier. There is another company called Zilingo, again, based out of Singapore, and it's a case study in poor governance. And to an extent, I think the private equity universe also needs to get trained on proper board governance. This basically is what I wanted to say as opening remarks, just bringing into context what is governance, what is management, what is good corporate governance, what are the benefits, and how to achieve, and how do we contextualize it with the fast changing business environment that we have here.
Thank you, Dr. Shukla, for really raising wonderful issues with illustrations of the companies. Bharat Pay has been a very painful episode for all entrepreneurs, and I'm sure that you will also later on, touch upon even some of the employee turned entrepreneurs who have also brought in their experience of industry but created problems for themselves, for the ecosystem that they work in. I'm talking here, about Paytm also, or Nika also, or many other companies also, where that employee turned entrepreneur. That is another issue. Even though they are not young, they are experienced, but still things are happening like that. But each and every point that you have mentioned, and especially I really love the 2 points of diversity, experience, independence, and competence of the independent directors on the board of Fed. And what a wonderful thing where you are saying that even you are evaluating the performance of the directors also, which is very important because after regulators must also be regulated. If those are or the people who are supervisors, they also need to show a very strong scorecard of their own independence, competence, and all that. So perhaps from where I think the technical knowledge matters a lot. I believe that independence should also be balanced with competence because many people who are coming as independent, they are independent, but they do not have the ability to judge. So we have an institute in India, which is Indian Institute of Corporate Governance, in which the people get trained. They need to qualify the test and all that. Do you believe that there should be a separate test for independent directors for startups? Separate training, separate qualification, separate examination. In other words, eligibility test for the people who want to join these unicorns or these startups. Dr. Shukla.
You raise a very important and unusual point. As you may well know, that most directors who serve on the boards of listed companies, they come with vast corporate experience, serve on multiple boards, and if I may dare say so, have large egos as well. For them to say that, okay, I need to go through a training program, I need to earn my professional qualification as a director before I'm deemed fit to serve on the board, is going to cause some ripples. Now, that is just setting the context. In terms of, you mentioned startups and the whole universe of unicorns requiring deeper and more competent professional governance. I think that's a very, very important point and must be acted upon by regulators immediately. Because many of these unicorns ultimately go to list themselves. That's their ultimate goal. And protecting the interests of the minority shareholders, which will be the public in the end, depends largely on how the company has been governed in the past pre-IPO. So it's important that certain bars and criteria be set, both in the pre-IPO stage and post-IPO stage, in terms of the quality of the governance. Now, having said all that, I actually really like the idea of having a proper qualification to be on the board. Yes, you could trade off, past experience and diversity of experience serving on the board of many other companies as a kind of a head start in terms of earning that qualification. But I wholeheartedly support the idea of training, certification, and ongoing professional development and self-evaluation of directors who serve on the boards, and to enable the protection of the company's interest and the stakeholder interest. I agree with you, Dr. Mohan.
Thank you. I have one more question, sir, with you, since you mentioned that part also, and which is diversity, gender diversity. Now, why not also have global diversity?
Yes.
Because more and more companies now are having a global stake. They are not just confined to India, but outside. And my feeling is that if we have one international director also as a requirement, or not requirement, at least desirable point, the same way that we have women. What do you say to that part? That each company should have, as far as possible, one international director also from the point of view of governance. Dr. Shukla.
I was managing director of a joint venture, which was a Tata company with McGraw-Hill Education and S&P 500 company. So clearly there was a need for diversity. So we had directors on the board who represented the McGraw-Hill interests. There were directors on the board from the two Tata trusts who represented the interest. But we also had independent directors from the education sector and the social impact sector to ensure that the company was not blind to its broader societal impact that it had on the economy and the educational system in India. So we actively sought diversity. I would say that this was many years ago, before this whole notion of diversity sort of matured and became alive in the boardrooms. But we actively sought that. Now, later on, when I became the regional VP for Asia Pacific, in addition to my role as MD of Tata McGraw-Hill, I served on the board of 14 different entities across Asia Pacific, obviously representing McGraw-Hill interest. But I started inducting some local talent, and we knew that we were moving into a digital era from print books. So, for example, in Korea, I inducted somebody from Yahoo. In Singapore, I inducted somebody from another internet company to help us think more strategically about how the industry is going to be impacted by digitalization. The final sort of concluding part, I would say, is that yes, companies are global, so they need to have global representation in the mothership board, not necessarily in the regional boards, but in the mothership board. What we also see is that the digital economy companies, they actually get more revenue, business, customer footprint from international markets than their own home markets. It's in their own interest to make sure that the talent at the board level is representative of what the company's footprint stands for. So that is purely the practical aspect. But the more important aspect, which my other esteemed panelists also spoke about, is diversity of viewpoints, experiences, competencies, and skills. The moment you get somebody from international on the board of a large global listed company, you fulfill that requirement because they will come with a diverse set of competencies and experiences. In fact, I would argue that boards should set themselves an agenda around diversity within the boardroom. They should have a target of inducting uh, individuals from international markets, gender diversity. There is a recent study, I don't quite recall the statistics, of US companies that actually proactively hired women board of directors. And the incidence of corporate misgovernance or reputation risks of companies where women were serving on the board was far less than all white or majority white or male dominated boards. So I feel very strongly about racial diversity. I feel very strongly about gender diversity. And I feel very strongly about geographical diversity.
We all know independent directors, what is their role responsibilities, what they're expected to do. But the question is the time that they devote is so less, then how we can expect that they should be fully aware about the activities of the company and they can do full justice to their work. Because what normally happens is they attend 4 or 5 board meetings, they receive the board papers or the agenda papers just 2 or 3 days in advance. Whatever is mentioned there, they have only access to that information, and based on that they are taking few decisions. So the question is how they are really giving their best as an independent director, and how this problem can be solved.
Yeah, I completely relate to this. Of course, Dr. Stephen should also respond to the very pertinent question Mr. Pramod has asked. It is correct indeed that directors just show up with very sketchy knowledge on the basis of the papers that are submitted to them. And how do we engage them more? So I would argue that there are some good practices that could be incorporated. For example, I serve on the board of governors of a very large school in Dubai. And one of the things that the CEO principal encouraged us to do was something called learning walk, where I would actually go down to the school, meet up with a few staff members, take a walk around the school to see the well-being of children, well-being of teachers, ask them questions about what they feel about the school, what makes them excited and come to the school every day. And these are some insightful things that that's an educational context. But for example, in a board of directors context, what I used to do as managing director of Tata McGraw-Hill is we used to have an international sales conference every year. Okay, so we had 4 different occasions for the board meetings, the quarterly meetings. One of them we had on the sidelines of the sales meeting because all the sales leaders, all the management was there. And we actually asked the board of directors to participate in the entire hoopla of a sales conference to really get first-hand knowledge of how the staff were feeling. We encouraged them to actually, in rotation, meet up with the senior leadership team and have some interactions with them. And it was mostly in an international setting. We used to go overseas as a big delegation, 500-600 people. So the board of directors were also not distracted that, okay, I have to jump here, I have to go there, and, I have to take this call. They were in a very company specific environment where they could immerse themselves as well. So I would say that, these are ways in which you can engage the directors more. The more they engage in these kind of settings, they would actually devote more time because they feel strongly about the company. They have met the people. They know it a little bit firsthand. They develop a certain passion for the success of the company, and slowly they will start engaging on the board matters more deeply than sketchily as you outlined. A company is to be, as sort of imagined as a living person, and that body is owned and mind is owned by, let's say, a large shareholder, a family owner. They will make sure that they look after the body in the best possible way. Okay. So I have no problem with family owned majority shareholders actually having a larger say in the governance and management of the company, because they have to protect their own interest as well. But good enlightened shareholders or owners, because they feel that they may be missing a trick in terms of the strategic planning of the company, may want to induct some independent advice by way of directors. There are many examples like that. And many years ago, if you remember Harsh Mariwala, who owns Marico, it is a family owned business out and out. But he actually stepped down from the chairmanship and got independent external director to replace himself, because he felt that the company would benefit from such a thing. So it is going to be voluntary. There is no regulation around this, but I see the point where Mr. Pramod is coming from.
Final point, Dr. Saab, Dr. Stephen, for you. Any message to the educational institutions, governance, Dr. Stephen?
I guess always have clear documentation, clear role clarity, be transparent, ensure that your books are all audited, be open to feedback, appoint directors who bring that diversity of skills and experience, and do things that make not only commercial sense but strong educational sense for the wider community.
Thank you very much on this wonderful advice, takeaway. I thank each one of you, Dr. Stephen, Dr. Ajay Shukla, Mr. Pramod Chand. I hope one day I'll also call you Dr. Pramod Chand. And that's one of my, really, really wish with all the expertise that you have. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity. Simply single honor for me today to be here, to starting on such a strong note. A report will be made and the recording will also be available to you, and to policymakers, some portions of this will also be sent. I hope they at least listen if they don't act upon it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Pramod. Thank you, Dr. Steve. Thank you, Dr. Ajay Shukla. Thank you.